Thank you, Madam Vice President, His Excellencies, distinguished delegates, good afternoon. I am honored to address this Assembly today at the annual panel discussion on the adverse impacts of climate change on human rights. I extend my gratitude to our hosts here at the Palais des Nations in Geneva for convening this critical dialogue. The subject matter that we are about to discuss is a reality for millions around the globe, and particularly in the Philippines. Our nation is one of the most disaster-prone countries globally, experiencing an average of 20 typhoons annually. In recent years, we have witnessed an increase in the frequency and intensity of these weather events, which put our lives, livelihoods, and our collective future at stake. Let me share some examples from our experiences. Typhoon Goni in 2020 severely impacted the Bicol region, particularly the island of Catanduanes. The Philippine Red Cross reported that the first town hit, Virac, suffered severe damage to approximately 80 to 90% of its buildings, and the storm displaced around 370,000 people and destroyed tens of thousands of homes. Typhoon Rai in 2021 made landfall several times across the Visayas and Mindanao. It affected over 7.8 million people, causing destruction to homes, properties, and livelihoods. Health services remained disrupted, leaving affected communities vulnerable to preventable diseases. Around 220 health facilities were damaged, impacting medical care delivery. And Typhoon Mawar in 2023 was one of the strongest tropical cyclones worldwide that year. The storm disrupted lives, including educational systems, affecting over 3 million people. Madam Vice President, these serve as reminders that the impacts of climate change are disproportionate, differentiated, and compounding. Those who are least responsible are often the least equipped to adapt, and it is where the right to a safe environment, adequate housing, and secure livelihoods are increasingly under threat. Each storm, flood, or drought translates into a struggle for survival and resilience for our people. Yet, among these challenges, we stand resolute. The Philippines is grounded in democracy and human rights principles. Thus, under the guidance of our President, Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr., we are leading by example by championing human rights-based climate action that is also informed by science and evidence. Climate change is also a matter of climate justice and social equity. With human rights as the fundamental foundation of our climate policies, we aim to protect the most vulnerable populations who are disproportionately affected by climate impacts. Human rights, as both an object and instrument of transformative climate action, are an appropriate tenet and approach for a democratic country like the Philippines, with a clear vision of the achievement of its development objectives. This proposition is taken much more than a treaty obligation. It is a moral imperative applied not just to the current generation, but instead looking forward in the interest of intergenerational responsibility and equity. The Philippines National Adaptation Plan and Nationally Determined Contribution Implementation Plan align with their own national frameworks. The Philippine Development Plan, the National Framework Strategy on Climate Change, and National Climate Change Action Plan. This ensures coherence and effectiveness across all levels of governance. Central to our approach are the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities, climate justice, and equity. Rooted in the best available science and indigenous knowledge, these principles guide our efforts to ensure that adaptation and mitigation actions are inclusive and responsive to the needs of the most vulnerable, including women, children, and the elderly. Furthermore, our commitment to a just transition towards a low-emission development is enshrined in legislation such as the Philippine Green Jobs Act, which is a pioneer in the ASEAN region. This legislation promotes green jobs that are not only decent, but also contribute to environmental preservation. In the Conference of Parties, we call on all parties, especially developed nations, to fulfill their commitments and moral obligations. Mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, providing means of implementation to developing nations, and supporting climate resilience initiatives are some of the steps towards collective prosperity and justice. I would like to emphasize that the concept of loss and damage goes beyond economic metrics. It encompasses the cultural, social, and psychological impacts that erode the fabric of affected communities. It is crucial that we recognize the livelihood resilience not just as an outcome, but as a continuous process that involves the participation of local communities, the innovation of sustainable practices, and the steadfast commitment of national and international bodies. Our discussions today must be rooted in the experiences of those who are at the forefront of the impacts of climate change. For today's session, I urge us all to listen, to learn, and to act decisively. Our collective efforts in this room can forge pathways to resilience that honor the rights and dignity of every individual affected by climate change. Thank you.